We'll be in 2 Kings chapter 6 if you want to turn there in your Bibles. We actually looked at this passage several months ago, maybe a year ago now, as we went through a study on the various kings of Israel. Some of you may remember that study, and you were there for that lesson. As I finished that lesson, I said there's so much more in this passage that I wish we had time to look at. And we're going to take a completely different approach to this same a similar text and same characters, or at least somewhat same characters. We're going to look at it from a different perspective. It was our study necessitated our going and focusing on the king himself. And in this case, there was a lot of bad to think or say about King Jehoram. He just wasn't a good king. In fact, there were hardly any good kings in the northern kingdom at all. And he fell in line with a lot of really bad kings. And we're going to look at his life, but we're going to look at it from a different perspective. We're going to look at it from the perspective of a man who didn't have a great testimony, who nevertheless was deserving of somebody's compassion. Even bad people need compassion. And there are people we'll rub shoulders with this week who do sometimes ridiculous things and things that hurt people and maybe even have hurt you. And we're going to hope to get a greater understanding of why this happens and what's really going on in their hearts and their heads. And most importantly, we're going to look at the practical side of things. How do we treat people that are difficult to be around? And you start to gain a greater understanding of what's going on in their lives, and oftentimes it'll help us. So let's look at 2 Kings chapter 6. We'll just pick up the story in verse 24 and read down to verse 30. And we'll look at some other verses as we have time. It says, "And it came to pass after this that Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his host and went up and besieged Samaria. And there was a great famine in Samaria. And behold, they besieged it until an ass's head was sold for 80 pieces of silver, and the fourth part of a cab of dove's dung for 5 pieces of silver. And as the king of Israel," his name is Jehoram, and not mentioned here, but his name is Jehoram, "was passing by upon the wall, there cried a woman unto him, saying, Help, my lord, O king. And he said, If the Lord do not help thee, when shall I help thee? Out of the barn floor, or out of the winepress? And the king said unto her, What aileth thee? And she answered and told this story. This woman said unto me, Give thy son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow." Now this is happening in real life. I hope you can understand the scope of this devastation and starvation in the city limits. "So we boiled my son and did eat him. And I said unto her on the next day, Give thy son that we may eat him. And she hath hid her son. And it came to pass when the king heard the words of the woman that he rent his clothes, and he passed by upon the wall. And the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth within upon his flesh." You may remember that last phrase there. We focused on that when we looked at this series of messages on the kings of Israel. Today, if you were to travel on the road from Nazareth to Jerusalem, no doubt in our minds, a road that Jesus and Joseph and Mary traveled on many occasions, as Jesus grew up in Nazareth. He and his earthly parents traveled that road many a time. You'd pass a lofty mountain and see there a remote Arab village. But if you went there today, it's very run down, surrounded by ruins, and there was a once great wall that is now fallen over, and the ancient streets are deserted. That, my friends, is the modern-day city of Samaria, which is incredible because when the nation was divided after Solomon's death into the northern and southern kingdoms, the southern kingdom's capital was in Jerusalem, and the northern cities were centered, the 10 tribes there were centered in this very same city of Samaria. It was once a booming, great city, prominent city. It was the capital of the northern empire during those days. It was founded by a man named Omri. He was the 6th king of Israel, and his reign lasted about 12 years. He was not a good king. As I said, many of the northern kings were bad eggs. He formed alliances, military and political alliances with the surrounding nations. They were engaged in paganism. and idolatry and all types of wicked behaviors. And he formed alliances and relationships with these nations. It ultimately influenced his leadership, and it trickled down to the entire nation. And in his home, a young boy was growing up, watching what was happening, watching his dad's example. And this young boy grew up to be a man. And when it became his turn and time to choose a wife of his own, he didn't pick a wife of his own people, but rather he picked a pagan woman to be his wife. And she was a very wicked woman. That couple, the son and daughter-in-law of Omri, were named Ahab and Jezebel. So I need to say no more about that. You get the influence. The father's influence in the home is paramount to the child's spiritual development. Since there was no spiritual leadership going on in the home, that gives you an idea of what became of the nation. Omri, the man who founded the city of Samaria, it is said of him back in 1 Kings, it says, Omri wrought evil in the eyes of the Lord and did worse than all that were before him. It would be bad enough for us if somebody said when our lives were over, yeah, he was just as bad as all of them. He was as rotten as all the examples he had around him. But it says about Omri, he was worse than all the kings that had preceded him. Of course, there were some others who would follow that would fill those shoes just fine. But this is the man who was leaving a legacy in this great city of the northern capital of Samaria. We can imagine here in this city the great prophet Elijah, when he stopped into Samaria to to confront Ahab and Jezebel about their wickedness and their paganism. Elijah, the great prophet of God, would visit that city. We can imagine Elisha, who was surrounded around the city of Dothan by Syrian soldiers, and God brought a blindness upon all those soldiers, and he took them and led them out of that surrounding, marched them right into Samaria, and could have had them all killed on the spot. That's the same city we're talking about today. We can see the Old Testament figure Naaman traveling on that road to Samaria, as he was told by the prophet Elisha that he had to, the only way he'd be cured of his leprosy was to go and wash himself in the Jordan River. And he traveled in and around the city of Samaria, and he rather, proudly and skeptically to follow the prophet's advice, only he was cured of his leprosy. Great events occurred around this city, but look at it now in our text. It's destitute. They were being besieged by the enemy. Nobody could get away. I would suppose if I was living within the city limits and absolutely starving to death, literally starving to death, I would try to find a way to slip out somehow. I would use whatever resources were at my disposal to get out of there and get some food, because starvation does something to people. Not a single person could get out, and nobody could get in to bring any provisions or food to the people there. So it was destitute. It was guarded so closely. The Bible never indicates how many people lived within the city limits during that day, but historians tell us that it was probably many tens of thousands. And although the Israelites did not keep population records that would pass down through time, fortunately, the Assyrians did. And in their recorded historical records, they say when they finally took the city, after they besieged it, and either the people surrendered or they became too weak to fight or too many died off, they besieged it, and then they took the city of Samaria, destroyed it. They said that they took out of that city about 27,000 captives. So those are the people that had survived the skirmishes, the battles, the starvation, leading us to believe that there may have been as many as 50,000 people or more living within the city limits. Now, we, as Pastor Joel mentioned, had our kind of a family reunion this week. Some of our kids came from out of state, and we tried as much as possible during the week to get together as often as we could, which meant we got together all at the same time, which means when everybody left, it was just sort of a startling contrast of quietness for those few moments, and you had to get used to it for a while. You thought something was wrong. I don't know how many people. I was talking to Brother Philip, Candace. I don't know. We probably had 20 or so people there, honey, maybe more. I don't know. I didn't count them. There were a lot of people running around the house. And, that's like feeding an army, we say. You got to feed an army of 20 people. It's an operation to get everybody around the table for pizza or whatever the case is. Can you imagine 50,000 or more people that have absolutely no food? And what that would cause within the city limits as people are literally starving to death in the city limits. It was so bad, the Bible tells us that a donkey's head was sold for 80 pieces of silver. Now, when they were going to eat the donkey, they would roast it, cook it somehow, and they of course wouldn't want to do that with the head attached, so they would cut off the head and eat the rest of the donkey, the more savory parts, if you're into donkey. I've never had a donkey before, but I guess when you're starving, any meat sounds good, right? You eat it raw. And so after they ate it, and people, tens of thousands of people are still starving. Some people have nothing. They start looking at that head that was severed off of that donkey, and they started saying, well, we could actually kind of eat that. People eat some strange foods when they're desperate. They said, how much do you want for the head that was cut off of the donkey that you ate? 80 pieces of silver. It said there that a fourth part of a cab of dove's dung. Now, I didn't know what a cab was. A cab of dove's dung. I've never gone to the store and say, could I have a couple of cabs of dove's dung? I mean, we used to have palm trees growing at the corner of our property here. Thank God it was on the neighbor's property. He cut the trees down. We had pigeons all the time. And pigeons are kind of territorial. They kind of hang out the same place. They sleep at the same place. And when they sleep or before they sleep or as they get up, they use the restroom, I guess, is a delicate way of saying that. And you'd see the remains on the ground. I've never been tempted, never in my whole life, to go over to see where the pigeons hang out and say, I wonder if I scrape some of that off and, put it in a bun. That would probably be, it's disgusting. And a fourth part of a cab, according to Bible scholars, is about half a pint. So you could get about a half a pint of burdew for another 5 pieces of silver if you had the money. It's funny, people amassed all these riches in this great city, the city of commerce and the capital of the nation, and money means nothing to you when you're destitute and you're starving to death. Your money means nothing to you anymore. The king of Israel, Jehoram, was so overcome with the suffering of his people that the Bible said he would, in the evening, walk out on the wall of the city and just kind of see the condition of the people. He probably witnessed their suffering. Some scholars believe that he would do that to keep a presence there, and some feel he was keeping his finger on the pulse of the people. Like, are they ready to revolt yet? Are they coming after me? Because, they'll begin to blame somebody for the hardship and the problems, and he was kind of looking over the city, and while he was walking on the wall of the city, examining the condition of his people, a woman came up to him and said, "Help, my lord, O king, help me." Now, when she asked for help, he assumed that what she wanted was food. Anybody living in the city at that time, that was their primary need. They wanted food. And he basically said, if God's not providing for you, what can I do for you? I can't give you any food. And then she began to tell this story, this incredible story of an agreement that she made with this lady that she knew, that they would boil one of their sons and eat it one day, and the very next boil the other child. Now, again, I just hung around my family extensively this past week, and two of my daughters have little children. And there's just something about a mother's maternal care for her child that makes it hard for us to comprehend how a woman would make that kind of enter into that kind of an agreement with someone to say, yeah, let's boil my child and eat him today, and then we'll go boil your child tomorrow and eat him then. Just, by the way, there's a biblical precedent for that. We read in a moment that was prophesied later on under the prophet Jeremiah, where people would actually do this. The point is that when you are starving, you are desperate. I don't think, maybe somebody here has been in that situation before. I rarely in my life have been hungry, really hungry, where I was faint or, was desperate. I don't think I've gone through this stage of my life and ever really been. Now, there are times when I was young I thought I was starving, but I really wasn't. But this is a bad situation. I don't know if this other lady never intended to have her son killed, or maybe she, even when you're starving, you still have a conscience, right? And she's looking into the eyes of her baby, and she can't go through with it, and she decides to hide her child and not follow through with her side of the agreement. She was happy to engage in cannibalism with the other woman's child, but when it came to her own, she drew the line there and said, I'm not going to do it. And so this woman who had given her son prior to that goes to the king and says, would you make her show where her child is so we can boil that child and eat. I want to just tell you that what is happening here is nothing that any of us have or hopefully ever will have to experience in our lifetime. That desperate situation where either you eat or you die. In some cases, you feel like you're half dead already. William and I were talking this morning before Sunday school, and he showed me we have these cactus. Well, they have cactus growing on their side of the wall over there. And this cactus is just out of control. It's probably 25 feet high. It's growing all over the place. And after a while, they don't get watered over there. So what eventually happens, it just prunes itself. It just falls over and lands on the ground. And we were trying to get it to fit into the green trash bin. So it was so long, we had to break it in pieces. So we're out there. You know, William's got a pretty good IQ. He was the valedictorian or something of his junior high. I don't know what it was. He had to give a speech. He really looked forward to that. He's pretty smart, smarter than me. But you know, I have a master's degree, and we're out there. We can't figure out how to break this cactus in half. You know, so he had to apply his taekwondo skills or something and finally get it to break up. And he said, "Look at this, Pastor. It's juicy on the inside." And I told him the story. I like to watch these survival stories. You know, my wife and I, and mother-in-law, sometimes will watch these incredible, gripping, true stories of people who get out in the desert and they pop the tires on their vehicle and then they drive on the rim and the tire catches on fire. So they're out there in the middle of nowhere, they're lost and they're trying to survive. And if you ever get there, I told William, knowing his dad is kind of adventurous, they may end up there one day. I said, William, you can always take a cactus and suck the juice out of it or eat the cactus. But I want to warn you about it. Everybody who I've seen do that has gotten sick. And I won't tell you what they did. I don't want to spoil your lunch, but they didn't keep it in very long. However, eating stuff like cactus gives you enough fluid to just survive just a few hours longer. And sometimes people do things I won't share with you today. People do very desperate things when they're dying of thirst or dying of hunger to survive. And this lady in this situation wanted her friend to boil their child so they could survive. Jeremiah, I said Jeremiah, it'd be the prophet Isaiah would prophesy. It is Jeremiah, but let me read you something that Isaiah said in Isaiah 49, verse 15. He asked this question: "Can a woman forget her sucking child, that she should not have compassion on the son of her womb?" Apparently, the answer to that question is yes. She can. If you're desperate enough, you can. Jeremiah would prophesy later in chapter 19, verse 9, that things would be so desperate for the nation after they, in his generation, turned their backs upon God and experienced God's judgment. He prophesied that God's people would turn from him and that they would eat their sons and their daughters. So this is not a unique experience, but it's one that is unfamiliar to each of us. These are people that are extremely desperate. I read and also watched a special on the Donner Party. You may remember that. Up in Northern California, they got stranded and bad weather took over. They couldn't get any provisions or food, and they got so desperate that they began to eat human flesh. It's an incredible story. What you may not know about that group, though, is most of them were religious people, many claiming to be Christians. They were from the Midwest, primarily Illinois and other Midwest states, and they came across seeking a better life. And if you would have told them before they made that journey, could you ever imagine yourself eating human flesh? They would have absolutely said no. I don't care what would happen, I would never do it. But you get desperate enough, it's amazing what might happen. Jan gave me several books on different various wars, which I've enjoyed Jan reading. And there was a prisoner camp in the Confederate States, in Georgia actually, called Andersonville. How many of you heard of Andersonville? Some of you do a little bit of war history. And the South was really getting the worst of it. They didn't have the financial provision to really provide for the prisoners that they have taken captive. And so if they had a hard time even feeding their own soldiers, you can imagine with the condition of the Union soldiers who were in prisoner camps in the South. It was beyond description. And it was so bad that it was reported that some of the Union soldiers killed their comrades, killed their own fellow soldiers while they were in prison, just to get a little bit of their beans or a little bit of their bread. They became murderous. They killed their own fellow soldiers. I'm not talking about the enemy. They killed their own fellow soldiers so they could take their small portion of food that was given out. And many of the men who were in Andersonville starved to death. There was not even enough food to keep them alive. So again, until we've been in that situation, we really can't appreciate how destitute the people were here. It was a terrible situation. And Jehoram heard this story that this woman was telling him, and he couldn't stand it. He tore his clothes in an act of mourning, and that's when they saw it. They saw that underneath his royal robes, he was wearing sackcloth, a cloth that someone would wear during times of mourning. And they saw a side of their king that day that surprised them. They never imagined that someone in his position, with everything at his disposal, would be mourning the terrible conditions that they were facing. So those are the invisible burdens. Liam, I forgot to tell you. Go look at that first point. Okay, that's it. Second point, inner sympathy. You're supposed to clearly tell your point. Sorry, guys, I thought we'd be connecting back there, and I didn't say that was your invisible burdens. So inner sympathy. The people saw something that had previously slipped their attention. They probably saw him taking his walks on the city wall, but never knew he was hurting like they were, or going through that same struggle. And the point is that oftentimes people carry burdens and struggles and inner conflicts, and their life is not going well. And you come to church, and you see them, and you shake their hand, and you say, "How's it going?" And they smile at you and say, "Just great. Things are going great for me. How about you?" And then you leave and you go home, and you never know that they're wearing sackcloth. They don't tell you. They don't complain. They don't want to give you all the details of how things are difficult in their lives in many respects. You know, God has made us in such a way in our life's journey that we have good times, and then we have sorrowful times. Ecclesiastes talks about that. And I hope and pray that all of you in coming to church, this is hoping to give you an upswing of a positive. It's a positive experience, and that you're able, at least temporarily, to forget the problems that you're going to face on Monday morning, or things that you're going through in your life, or difficulties, or sometimes events and circumstances that you will not be able to change. With all the worry and concern that you can muster, they're still going to be there. I'm hoping that today's a good day for you. Sunday's always a good day for me. But sometimes we're hypocritical. We come to church and we pretend everything is just going great in our lives, but we're hurting. We have problems. We have struggles. And God has called each of us to go through life, and there'll be times where we'll be wearing sackcloth. And let me say this, just to be honest, some of you will be called to wear sackcloth more often than others. Some of you will wear it for longer periods of time. Some of you will wear it more often. Some of you will go through what you may consider an unfair amount of hardship in your life. And by that I mean you're wearing that sackcloth. In most cases, we really won't realize what people are going through, and some people, sadly and ridiculously, there's some people in our lives that we'll look at and we'll envy them. And we'll say, I wish I could have a life like that. And guess what they're saying about you? The same thing. I wish my life were more carefree. I wish I was in that situation. I wish I didn't have to deal with this. And we, as the Bible says, compare ourselves to each other, which the Bible says is always unwise. You all have to bear your own burdens. You will all have burdens. You will all have difficulties. And sometimes we don't realize that people are going through really hard times because they don't talk about it or share it with us. If we really knew what was going on in their lives, it might change the way we think about them. There's a poet by the name of John Morley who wrote a short poem, very short. I'm kind of prone to make up short poems, and I share with the kids all the time my great works of poetry. I'm yet to find a teenager that appreciates it. They just roll their eyes at me, but I'm still working on it. You just pray that I might get through to them. This is about the length of a poem I would write right here. So he said, if every man's internal care were written on his brow, how many would our pity share who have our envy now? If you could really see what a person was going through in life, you wouldn't envy their life, you would pity them. And that could be said of people sitting right here in this auditorium. You look around at each other, don't actually do it. You look around at people today. There's some people sitting here that are being hypocritical. You're pretending everything's going great in your life, but the truth is you're going through a bad patch right now. And if we really, really knew what people were going through, we wouldn't envy their circumstances. We'd probably feel sorry for them. And that's what happened with King Jehoram. People saw for the first time that he was vulnerable, that he was hurting too, that he was probably hungry too, and that he felt responsible for the situation in the nation. Many Christians sadly envy people, even lost people, for their circumstances. We look at their popularity, they're famous, or they're talented, or they're rich, and we look at them and envy their lives, and many times we don't stop and think, there's a price that comes with all that glitz and glitter. There's a big price. In fact, this man was not even a Christian, but he wrote an article, and he summarized 4 common traits that are found among the rich and famous. People that are in the media all the time, they get all the attention. And he said there are 4 things that often accompany people who make it big in life. One of them is substance abuse and possibly addiction or even overdose. How many famous people do we know were consumed with alcohol or addicted to drugs or even died? One example pops in my mind. I watched a documentary on Michael Jackson. People thought he was the greatest thing in the world. I didn't, but I do remember he was my age. And long after I gracefully grew old and gray, he looked like he was half my age. When he died, he was much older than people imagine him to be, but he had surgical operations and he hid the reality of the natural process of aging. And in order to do that, he had to have injections and drugs. In order to keep up his dancing regimen, he had to be pumped full of all kinds of things to keep his body working correctly, and ultimately he died of an overdose. Another characteristic, not only substance abuse, but isolation. They isolate themselves from others. Financial ruin, based upon 2 things: lavish spending and not ever learning how to manage their finances correctly. They waste and spend money and don't use their money wisely, and many of them at the end of their lives die in bankruptcy. People who were the envy of the world. Movie stars and sports stars die penniless. And then the weight of expectations. They're under constant scrutiny. They won't be left alone. There's pressure for them to perform. And, those are the kinds of things awaiting the rich and famous. I guess one of the primary examples of that would be a man named Howard Hughes. Maybe our younger people don't know who he is, but most of us who have been down the road a little bit know about Howard Hughes. He didn't die a millionaire. He died a billionaire. He died living with an unnecessary fear of germs. He just thought germs were everywhere, and he went through great lengths to make sure he wouldn't be subjected to germs. He had a phobia about getting germs on him. And he lived in isolation, away from everybody. He didn't trust anybody. He didn't trim his fingernails or toenails. I don't know what that reminds of those Nebuchadnezzar, you know. That can look kind of gnarly. These long fingernails and toenails. Didn't cut his hair. Didn't bathe. Stayed in bed. He had bed sores. Lived in lonely isolation. He distrusted everybody. He was a drug addict. In fact, when he died and they did an autopsy on his body, they found 5 broken hypodermic needles in his arm. These are the ones that they just didn't get out. There were probably many where they injected their dangerous drug and got out. But 5 broken needles. He didn't even know he had them in his arm. He died lonely, broken, paranoid, drug addicted, and abandoned. The only people that seemed to show any concern at all for Howard Hughes were people who thought they could get to his fortune. And I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I watched it in a documentary, and we all know that everything we watch on TV is true. The Mormon Church was going through very detailed efforts to acquire his wealth, including forgery and misrepresentation. And I'm thankful to at least say the Mormon Church didn't get his billions of dollars. I don't know who did. Maybe some of you got some of it. I don't know. I didn't get any fortunes. But he died a wasted man. And sadly, I don't know if there's a single person in his life that showed any genuine interest in him. You know, once in a while, we'll get the advantage and the ability to look at someone and see their sackcloth, see their suffering, see their hardship, and get to know what's really going on in their lives. And God does that for a reason. He allows us to step up to the plate and show some genuine compassion towards a person like that. Not what we can get out of them, but simply to help them. Anyway, that was my inner sympathy, wasn't it? That was my invisible burden. Oh, that was my invisible burdens. Oh, guys, I didn't give you that first point. That was my inner sympathy. We should have some inner sympathy. You're getting me all confused. You're getting me all mixed up here in my outline. Now let's go to inner sympathy. They did the other one way too early. I don't know why they did that, but they put the other point up way too early in the outline. What is our responsibility towards people that are wearing sackcloth? What is your job and your ministry to people like that? Now, Jehoram wasn't the kind of guy that would naturally evoke my sympathy. Can I just be honest about that? He led the nation in immorality, dragging it down spiritually. Many of us would have been citizens of that city, starving on our own, going through hardship, and thought to ourselves, you know, he's getting what he deserves. He should be wearing sackcloth. Look what he's produced in our nation because he's turned his back upon God. We might have said to ourselves, you know, good for him. I'm glad he's suffering like the rest of us. But that's not what we need to do to people who are like that. We should not judge them or criticize them or dislike them. We should pity them. Here's the key statement I'm going to make in this entire lesson, which is good because I only have 2 minutes left and another point. Okay, here we go. You no longer focus on what they do, but rather on why they do it. So you see people that make life miserable for other people, maybe make life miserable for you. You have a coworker that just drives you crazy, and it just seems like they're just bent on causing drama or making life difficult. Maybe you have a relative or a neighbor or someone who's doing that, and we always just, we focus on what they're doing. We don't look a little deeper and say, now why are they doing that? Why would he say that? Why would she do that? We're not stopping to realize there's usually an inner reason causing that to happen. Every lost person should be the recipient of our sympathy because they're living with the nagging reality that things are not going to end well for them. It's not going to end well at all for them. And they're living with that reality. We should feel sorry for them. The Bible says that the way of transgressors is what? It's hard. It's a hard life to be a lost person. So if they are arrogant or rude or say or do things to mistreat you, you shouldn't just focus on what they're doing. You should look a little deeper and say, well, yeah, no wonder. They're wearing sackcloth. They're living a hard life. According to the Bible, their path in life is not an easy one. They don't have the assurance of salvation that you do. They don't have the promise of God's presence in times of difficulty. They don't, more than anything else, have this settled reality that no matter what happens in this life, it doesn't really matter because beyond this one is a far better one that I'm going to enjoy for all eternity. They don't have those promises. So therefore, we should be sympathetic toward them. David knew the reality of his hardships were a direct result of his sins, and he said, my sin is ever before me. But then he said this. He said, wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. A lost person cannot say that. He says, restore to me the joy of thy salvation. They have no salvation. And I've said it many times before, but hurt people, what? Hurt people. People that are hurt will often hurt somebody else. Which brings us to the last point, incomplete repentance. I'm sorry, guys. I need to work on this a little bit. I've only done this for 35 years. I need to get this down a little bit where it's clear to follow me. When King Jehoram tore his robes, revealed his sackcloth underneath, there appeared to be some sense of conviction by his response there. I'm looking at that saying, this otherwise wicked king is he's got a conscience after all. Well, we all have a conscience. In fact, in verse 27, I think it is, he makes a reference to God. He says, if the Lord is not going to help you, what can I do for you? He seems to be a conscience, or it's funny how people that reject God and all that he stands for and follow pagan practices and turn their backs on the Lord, when things get difficult, all of a sudden, who is he referencing in his speech? Now. If God can't help you, what can I do for you? You'd like to think that there's something that he's turning the corner, something good may come out of this. Not so. Let's finish by looking at what happens beginning at verse number 31. Then he, Jehoram, said, God do so and more also to me, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, shall stand on him this day. In other words, Elisha was in the city of Samaria, suffering along everybody else. He was God's prophet. Undoubtedly, he came to Jehoram and other leaders and said many times, if you don't straighten up, get back right with God, the judgment's going to fall upon our nation. These are just the pangs of problems. They're going to get worse. He probably warned them dozens of times. Now that it's finally befallen their besiege and it's befallen their city, he says, go get him. I'm going to take his head off. I'm going to kill him. But Elisha sat in his house, and the elders sat with him, and the king sent a man from before him. But ere the messenger came to him, he said to the elders, see how this son of a murderer has sent to take away mine head? Look, when the messenger cometh, shut the door and hold him fast at the door. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him? So not only did he send a messenger to go get Elisha so he could kill him, he followed that messenger. He was going to make sure the job got done. Tragically, when he reached his crossroads, Jehoram could have said, God, forgive me. I'm wrong. Help me to turn back to you, and please forgive our city of its iniquities and its paganism and its idolatry. Instead, since hurt people, he found the easiest target, and it happened to be the man of God who was living within the same city, going through the same problems, and he said, let's take his head off. There's a difference between being sorry for our sins and being sorry for the consequences of those sins, and Jehoram is an example of that. And I guess if there's anything we can learn from this final point, it's that if you see people that are hurting, that are wearing sackcloth and going through problems, and it seems to be hardening their heart, do everything while you still have a chance to do it to get them to see the error of their way. Come alongside them. Say, well, yeah, he doesn't even like me. The Bible never says, only go to people who like you and help them. It says, love your enemies. If they are self-destructing, don't stand back and say, well, they're getting what they deserve. I'm just going to stand by and watch this gleefully and see them suffer for a while. There's always a reason behind it. And a lost person definitely needs our intervention, or even a Christian who's away from God. Maybe one reason they're so hard to be around is because they're wearing sackcloth. And you and I have no idea what they're going through in their lives. Just food for thought. Father, we thank you for this.